Hey everyone, I want to welcome you back to the channel and thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. If you like the videos I'm doing, I hope that you'll like this video and more importantly that you will subscribe. I have a video today that I'm doing that is kind of a tie-in to the previous video I did, which was about a letter that Jesus tells the Apostle John to take to the church at Pergamos, which this takes place in the book of Revelation. And what he was actually talking about is the altar at Pergamos. And if you didn't see that video, I'll put a link to it in the description if you want to go back and watch it. But one of the things I pointed out is that Jesus refers to Pergamos as the place where Satan dwells and says it's where Satan's throne is. And he specifically says that it's the place where his faithful martyr Antipas was slain. And historically, Antipas, an early believer, was martyred at the altar at Pergamos. So that's how we know this is what Jesus is talking about. And the way that Antipas was killed is that they put him inside of a bronze statue of a bull that was hollowed out and roasted him alive, basically. And I pointed out in that video that the altar at Pergamos has been reconstructed and even had replicas built of it throughout history as early as just a few years ago. And I asked the question, why would anybody do this? And I'm going to cover something very similar today in this video. Just sort of as a segue to move from one thing into another, I'm going to show you a picture here talking about that Antipas was burned alive inside a bronze bull. This is a bronze bull statue that is in Birmingham, England, that apparently is a pretty big tourist attraction, although I had never heard of it until I started working on this video. But if you look at this maybe is something of what it looked like, and I'm wanting to be very careful in not misleading anybody to think that I believe that this particular statue is in any way tied into that. I mean, I suppose it could be, but I haven't found anything that would point to that. This is just an idea of what that bronze bull might have looked like. But I sort of threw that in there because, again, this is in Birmingham, England, and just recently in Birmingham, England, something occurred that involved a bull that really got my attention. And it happened at what is known as the Commonwealth Games, which if you're like me and you're here in the United States, you might not have heard of that. Probably most Americans hadn't. I'm somewhat familiar with the Commonwealth Games simply because I'm a big boxing fan, and a number of fighters that I have liked over the years and been a fan of first made a name for themselves at the Commonwealth Games. That being said, I'm not really familiar with it, but basically the Commonwealth Games is just a smaller version of the Olympics, kind of. And at the opening ceremonies this year, they brought out as a show this giant mechanical bull that someone had built. And they had actors choreographed dance and all kinds of stuff going on around it. But one of the things they did was that this crowd of again, I guess they were actors, bowed down and appeared to be worshiping this bull. It's got my attention for two reasons. One, I mean, it's, in my opinion, pretty satanic looking, but that's my opinion. Others might look at it and not see that. And I don't know that that was the intention of whoever built this bull, but there was something else that really grabbed me about this. And in order to lead into that, I'm going to read something out of the book of Ecclesiastes. It's found in Ecclesiastes 1:9. It says, "That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun." And if you've ever read the book of Ecclesiastes, that last line is kind of the recurring theme throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, that there is nothing new under the sun, meaning that everything that is done has been done before, that there's nothing new, or as far as wickedness goes, there's nothing new man comes up with that man has not done before. And I think that's a good lead into this. Because I think all of this bull and the fact that these onlookers seem to be worshiping it, can be traced back in the history of the Bible and something we see in the Old Testament that I think is resurfacing now, or maybe it's not even resurfacing. Maybe it's been there all along and just no one has seen it. But to lead into that, I'm going to bring in just a couple of more scriptures real quick. And so we're going to go to the book of Exodus. In Exodus chapter 32, there's a story, and just to give a little background, the Israelites, the Hebrews, were enslaved in Egypt in bondage, and God sends Moses to challenge Pharaoh to let the people go, and Pharaoh won't do it, and so God sends plagues and signs and wonders and eventually delivers the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. And so at this point they were in the wilderness, and God was leading them. Again, they'd seen all these signs and wonders that God had done, miraculous things, but they get into the wilderness, and God tells Moses to come up on this mountain because he's going to meet with him. And what he's going to do is give him the 10 Commandments. But while Moses is up there, the people, their hearts turn from God and they want false gods to worship. And so they get Aaron to make them an idol, a god that they can worship, and it is a molten calf. And the reason I read that verse in Ecclesiastes is that we see this later on, many generations later. Israel has become a kingdom. You have David as the king, and then when David dies, his son Solomon becomes the king, and when Solomon dies, his son Rehoboam becomes the king. But Rehoboam does not treat the people fairly, and so much of the nation rebels, and the kingdom split into two, and it's divided between the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, which remain faithful to Rehoboam, and basically the rest of the tribes all unite under a man named Jeroboam. And Jeroboam, when he takes the throne, begins to get afraid that at some point the people are going to go back to Jerusalem to worship at the temple, and when they do, their heart's going to be turned back to the Lord, so they're going to want to reunite the kingdom. And so in order to try to stabilize his power, he creates a false religion, a counterfeit religion. And what is it that he gets people to worship? You may have just guessed it. He gets them to worship calves, these two golden calves that he has made, and the people bow down before it, and it's very, very displeasing to God. And I'm showing this picture of this bull again in Birmingham, England, not to point out that this is somehow tied into that, but this is a bronze cow, but this might give you an idea of what the golden calf might have looked like. But the whole point of all this is when I first saw this big mechanical monstrosity, aside from thinking that it was satanic, it made me think about in the Old Testament that we were just talking about false gods. There are many false gods mentioned in the Old Testament, but I would say by far the most prominent and the one that causes the people of Israel to stumble the most is the false god Baal. And Baal in the Old Testament is represented by a bull. So just in case some of you maybe think it's a stretch that people would be at this day and age worshiping an ancient false god from the Bible, there's a few things I want to show you, and that I think there's more to it than just worshiping a false god from ancient times. I think it goes deeper than that. But one of the things I want to show you, this is a picture of the temple of Baal, which is from ancient Canaan. This actually was in the nation of Syria. And this made pretty big headlines just not that many years ago, because just a few years ago, if you're not familiar with it, there's a war that's been going on in Syria for a number of years now, and this structure was actually, for the most part, destroyed just a few years ago. I think it was actually ISIS that destroyed it. But you see the temple here. This was the temple of the false god Baal. And here's a artist rendering, I guess, of what it would have looked like in ancient times. Pay particular attention to this archway right here at the front, because after the temple was destroyed, the archway was the only thing that was left standing, and there's a picture of it. And there's a before and after picture. But the interesting thing about this is, going back to the archway, for some reason, someone created a replica of this archway, and it has been taken throughout cities all over the world just to display in these cities and to be something that tourists could come to see. And so I go back to the question of, why would you do this? You know, there's the archway in London, and there it is in New York City, and there it is in Washington, D.C. And I don't know how many other cities it went to. But why would you do this? And so I submit to you the same thing I came up with for why would a certain United States political party build a replica of something Jesus referred to as Satan's throne and use it in a presidential convention. I believe this is the world elites showing us who they serve. They are showing us their allegiance to Satan. And you say, well, this is to Baal. Why would you say to Satan? Well, first of all, this is nothing less than just outright defiance to the Lord God Almighty, the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because one of the things that is very much a reoccurring theme in the Old Testament is how much God hates the worship of false gods, and particularly God hates Baal worship by his people. But I also said a few minutes ago that I think this goes deeper than just worshiping an ancient god from the Canaanite era. And that is that Baal is also known by other names, and one of the names Baal is known by is the name Beelzebub. And you might be familiar with that name. Beelzebub is a name also very often attributed to Satan. The Bible several times attributes the name Beelzebub to Satan. Even Jesus himself makes this connection. There's a story in the New Testament where Jesus is casting out demons of people who are possessed by demons. And when the religious leaders who hate Jesus see this, they try to attribute it to that he is casting out demons by the power of Beelzebub. And I'm not going to get too far into this, but that's really, really, really dangerous ground to get into when you start attributing the things that God has done, good things that God has done, to Satan or to a demon, or to, in this case, they use the word Beelzebub according to the scriptures. But if you read the scripture, they attribute it to the power of Beelzebub. And Jesus immediately responds by saying, quite brilliantly I might add, how can Satan cast out Satan? And what he's saying is, if Satan's doing a bad work, Satan is not going to stop that. Satan's not going to cast demons out, because he's divided against himself if he does this. And I've always figured this was one of those instances where they tried to use an accusation against Jesus, and Jesus' response left them walking away, surely scratching their heads, thinking, wow, I really didn't see that coming. But the point I'm getting at here is they attribute it to the power of Beelzebub, and Jesus immediately responds, absolutely connecting the name Beelzebub with Satan. And so I would say, just based on the Lord's words, this is absolutely a monument to Satan. Now, I want to be really careful. I don't know that the person that even built this built it for that purpose, although, as I keep saying, that may well be the case. This could be something that someone built as just a replica of something from ancient times, but I go back to the fact that why would you use this of all things? Why would you pick a monument to Baal? There are plenty of structures from ancient times that there are ruins still standing that you could erect a replica of that would not have the significance that this does. Although there is also the issue that we have all over the world replicas of temples and monuments to false gods. Maybe I'll do a video on that in the future, but I don't want to get too far off into that right now. But this is absolutely a monument to Satan, and this is absolutely showing worship and reverence and allegiance to Satan. And the thing is, as with the previous video I did, as well as in this video right here, this is just a few examples of what's going on in the world right now. And I'll probably follow this up with yet even one more video, maybe more than that, just showing you some of these examples. I don't want to just beat this into the ground too much, but this is happening all over the place. So I'm just going to remind you again, let's be encouraged. Let's keep looking up. The King is coming, and I believe he is coming soon. And if you don't know him, if you don't know Jesus, then I am begging you today, surrender your life to him. And if you've never done that, there'll be a link in the description that will explain to you who Jesus is and how you can be right with God and know that when you die, you're going to go to heaven. The King is coming, and there are dark days coming for those that don't know him. So please, at least take the time to looking at how to come to a place where you're right with God and how you've given your life to Jesus. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope all of you have a great day. God bless you. I love you.